Behold, an Invitation to Wonder by Justin Hoffman. Chapter 9. The Blessed Who Remain Steadfast. Narrated by Lyndall Blatch.
The blessed who remain steadfast. Job never saw why he suffered, but he saw God, and that was enough. Tim Keller. You may have seen the bumper sticker, "Life is good." There is certainly truth to that statement. Life is a blessing. It is an incredible privilege to exist, to be able to contribute a chapter to the human story, and specifically to the great overarching story of redemption. But it is also true that life doesn't always feel good, nor is every life actually doing good, accomplishing a good purpose. We often experience difficulties that are utterly outside our control and that make life hard. We also see our sinful behaviour introducing destructive elements into our own life and the lives of others. It seems as though at times happiness is utterly out of our grasp and life feels anything but good. Into these real-life heart trials and sin struggles, James speaks with profound sympathy and insight. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast, in James 5:11. We consider them blessed as we raise our vision to greater purposes and joys than merely our momentary emotions. We consider them blessed as we raise our eyes to God, to His purposes, and to our opportunity to glorify Him in the midst of the mess of daily life. Blessed are those who remain steadfast. Steadfastness, by its very nature, includes suffering, struggle, effort. But it also means not being conquered by those things. Everyone suffers, everyone faces challenges in life, some even of our own making, but blessed are those who endure. James is not describing the simple, short-sighted success of merely muddling through trials without giving up. James is speaking of living a joyful, victorious life, in spite of personal failure and painful circumstances, by looking to and trusting in the good purposes and superior power of God who is working in and through us. Steadfastness requires determination. It requires self-control even when we come to the realization many things are outside our control. This is why James, who begins his letter exhorting to steadfastness, spends a great deal of his letter considering things we can't control. Beholding things outside our control helps us look to the one who is in control. Behold the tongue. Hold your tongue! We might have heard our parents say this on countless occasions growing up. Yet we discover compliance to this command is not as easy as we might at first think. If we could hold our tongue, then many injuries and injustices could be avoided. But though the tongue is small, James insists it is not easily controlled. Now, if we put the bits into the horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Behold, the ships also, though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. Behold, how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of injustice. The tongue is set among our members, staining the entire body and setting on fire the entire course of our life, and is set on fire by hell. That's in James chapter 3, verses 3-6. Just as a big horse is guided by a small bit, and a large ship is governed by a small rudder, and a huge fire is started by a small flame, the tongue has disproportionate power to do good or evil, and too often it is doing evil. In fact, a world of injustice. In the same way, just as these are small examples of big influences, so also is the tongue among our other body members. As these small examples of big influences, just so is the tongue among our members. Our members, James says. The apostle and brother of Jesus includes himself among those who have this affliction. But notice the flow here. The entire body is stained by the tongue. Why? Because it inflames what is already in our nature, and this tongue flame itself comes from hell, from something deeper and darker within us. James is famous for his bold, convicting rebukes regarding the use of our tongue. But it is important to see that James's discussion of the tongue is just one illustration of the many ways that we all offend God. We all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body, in James 3 verse 2. According to James, our use of words is not the ultimate example of our sinfulness. It is just one example of the many ways that we all frequently stumble. James wants us to consider the tongue so that we will, in doing so, come to realize the deeper sinful nature that underlies all of our sins. The untamable tongue. This small tongue that has such a big effect should be easy to control, right? Just like the horse's bit, the ship's rudder, and the small flame. But we can't control our tongues. Why? Scottish theologian Sinclair Ferguson observes, "The tongue is so small, it has no bone, and yet it is so powerful to build up and destroy. Why does it do that? Because it carries the breath of our souls into the world in which you live." The wickedness of the words we speak is the breath coming out of our souls. It is an expression of what is in our hearts. It is not just coincidence that our words are often cutting or condescending or gossip spreading. Our hearts are corrupt, and so our words are corrupt. The tongue is setting on fire the entire course of our life and is set on fire by hell. In other words, the big problem is not just that we use our tongues the wrong way. This is merely the symptom of a deeper, darker issue. The tongue is set on fire by hell. When we speak corrupt words, we are merely giving vent to the hellish nature of our corrupt souls. Pride leads us to look down on others. Envy causes us to undermine the success of others. Bitterness causes us to resent others. What we need, James is telling us, is not just a muzzle for our mouths. We need a cure for our souls. The perfect man. Truly, we all stumble in many ways. The wicked way we use our words is just one of many examples, James insists, of the depravity of our hearts. Thus, the answer for our tongue problem, as with the many other ways that we stumble and sin, is not clean up your act and start using your words in better ways. James pointedly insists that no one can tame his or her tongue in James 3 verse 8. Just as no one can overcome any other sin or their own sinful nature in their own strength or by mere force of will. Let's go back to verse 2. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. While many Bible students rush to say that perfect here means mature, is it possible that James actually had in mind a perfect man? James, the brother of Jesus, had seen a perfect man. James had observed firsthand someone, Jesus, who had never stumbled with a single word. James knew someone who had bridled his whole body. James is convinced that because we all stumble in many ways, none of us can bridle our tongue. But James is pointing us to the only perfect man who has ever lived. He is our only hope, not only for overcoming sinful words, but for successfully bridling our sinful nature. We all stumble in many ways, but Jesus did not stumble even in his use of words. We need this perfect man. Behold the farmer. James continues a few chapters later with another example of a person who is out of control. You are not the only person who suffers from a lack of control. In fact, your lack of control inside displays a general principle around us. The entire world is, we have to confess, not revolving around us, is not performing according to our commands. Jesus points us to the farmer who is not in control either. Be patient, therefore, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient over it until it receives the early and the late rain, in James 5 verse 7. Patience is one of the hardest lessons we are called to learn, isn't it? Remaining steadfast will mean enduring seasons of life that at times feel unbearably long. It would be one thing if the Lord would show us some clear path ahead and some action we could take toward that goal. But there are times when all we can do is watch and wait. Perhaps you've been praying for a better work situation. You have sown job applications like seed. You've followed up with phone calls. You have agonized in prayer. You've done all that you know to do. Now all you can do is wait. John Milton wrote a beautiful poem expressing the difficulty of exercising patience. Sonnet 19 is a meditation on Milton's own blindness and resulting feelings of inability to serve the Lord in any meaningful capacity. While Milton expresses his deep frustration and questions to God, he finally concludes, "They also serve who only stand and wait." Part of serving God is simply waiting on God. Waiting on His timing rather than trying to force our own. Waiting on His plan rather than brashly moving forward in our own. They also serve who stand and wait, and wait, and wait, and wait. The farmer is serving not only when he is ploughing. He is wise not only when he is working, but when he is waiting. He waits for the rain he needs in order for the harvest to be fruitful, the rain that he himself cannot bring. We do not have to share the agricultural surroundings of James to learn the lesson he is teaching. The farmer in reality is, of course, one example of what every human has to do at different points in life. We are called to trust God in circumstances over which we have no control. Like the farmer, we all have to wait on God's timing for things outside our own control, for future fruit from our labours, and ultimately for the coming of our Lord. It is not enough to wait for a painful trial to end or some big prayer request to be answered. There will always be another one coming soon. Ultimately, we are waiting for the Lord to come back. That may be after we die, so we are in this for the long haul. How do we hang in there for a lifetime of suffering? Notice the motivation James provided from the outset. Be patient, therefore, until the coming of the Lord. Behold the judge. James opened his letter with an exhortation to suffering saints to remain steadfast. He warned them against pervasive sin that seeks to ignite forest fires of trouble. He encouraged them with the example of the farmer who works hard and then waits long. James then provides the foundational hope that makes all this suffering and sin fighting and waiting worth it. Behold, the judge is standing at the door, in James 5 verse 9. Ultimately, we are not waiting for the end of a trial or for the answer to a prayer. We are not merely concerned about some short-term success. We are not just waiting for things outside our control to settle down. When we are thinking correctly and emoting accurately, what we are truly waiting for is the coming of the Lord. Behold, the judge of the universe. He controls everything. In the immediate context, James is reminding his readers that the judge is standing at the door, his return imminent, because his readers are wrestling with the reality of their own sin and the sins of others. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door, in James 5 verse 9. Here is a poignant reminder. True to reality, a significant portion of our patient endurance will involve patiently enduring our own sin struggles as well as the sins of others that directly affect us. Yet before you grumble at or judge others, remember that your own judge is standing at the door. Your being long-suffering toward others will seem like nothing once you yourself are standing in front of the Creator of the universe to give an account. Our soon-coming appearance before the Judge of the world should warn us to sober, humble endurance even with difficult and harmful people. The coming of the Judge, however, is not only a warning, it is also the sweet consummation of everything we've been hoping for and looking toward. In the verse immediately preceding James's warning that the Judge is at the door, he expresses the same reality in comforting terms. Be patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. James 5 verse 8. James is not only coming as the great Judge of sin, but also as the Lord who has been benevolently directing every step, every detail of our lives for our good and His glory. Thus, just a few verses later, we read the remarkable statement with which we began this chapter. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful, in James 5 verse 11. It is absolutely vital for us to trust the goodness and love of God toward us in the midst of all our sin struggles and patient endurance of things outside our control. We must trust that God has good purposes for the difficult things He allows in our lives, even when we can't see why we are suffering. If we see God in our suffering, that will be enough. James points us to Job. As the tongue is just one example of the failures of our sinful nature, Job is just one example of a person who suffered patiently, struggled with sin failures, and yet was brought through faith in God to a happy end. Job is a wonderful example who remained steadfast and was blessed. But there are many others to whom we could also point. Ruth labored patiently and faithfully through personal loss, singleness, and poverty. And in the end, she saw God's good purposes for her come to fruition. Joseph endured personal betrayal and slander, and then saw God work it all together for his good and the good of his family. Paul was in prison for preaching the gospel, with other Christians actually trying to add affliction to his bonds. Yet he found God's grace sufficient for the trial, and so was brought to rejoice in the Lord. Each of these men and women of faith looked to God and so received the strength they needed to suffer well, to remain steadfast. Jesus himself is our definitive example of patient suffering. We are told in Hebrews 12 verse 2 to look to the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. We consider those blessed who remain steadfast, and Jesus is the ultimate reminder of this reality. Jesus perfectly fulfills the promise James provides for everyone who patiently endures. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. James 1 verse 12. The great comfort and encouragement for every believer is that Jesus himself is standing at the door. His return is imminent, and those who remain steadfast will soon join him in receiving the crown of life and experience complete victory over every struggle they have endured in this world. This reality is sometimes difficult to see when we are surrounded by suffering or enduring a lengthy season of waiting. But behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast.